Okay, you can see that we've got a very nice introduction to this guns to the NAS conference, and it's really good because it actually shows a gun, which for me is really important. A, because it's been my sphere of study, but B, because so many wreck sites have been found because of guns. So if we look at the next slide, you can see here one of the newer ones, HMS Victory, and I actually think that that's the conger in the gun at the center of your slide, the first slide introducing this conference. So, and then you get to the one or two guns, and this is the Victory mapping after all of the guns have been visible, which apparently shows a lot of net snagging, which again is something that is quite a lot of interest, because it's net snags or fishing that actually has also found a lot of the sites, both within the Protection of Wrecks Act and around the world. So I think it's particularly apt. So guns at sea have been around almost as soon as guns came within England, and obviously earlier in different countries. But here we have the Warwick Roll of 1485 showing wrought iron guns in the middle of the ship, in the waist of the ship. So the earliest use of guns at sea, or one of the earliest uses of guns at sea in England. And as long as they've been guns at sea, they've been people who've been looking for them, because obviously there is money that is within those guns, and often they're recovered for reuse, as was the case with the Mary Rose, trying immediately to salvage a ship, to lift the ship, basically for the weapons that were on board with that huge amount of money invested within them. So this is 1621, where you've got absolutely well thought out methods of lifting guns at sea. It's a shame that Mary Rose failed to be lifted by herself, but then it's given us the complete shipwreck, but a number of the guns were lifted. Now, also apt is one of the early finds of a loose gun, and this is on the Goodwin Sands, the gun on the left, which we think is serpentine, perhaps, which would have fired lead iron ball or lead ball with an iron core, or possibly a top gun, in which case it would be on a pivot. And you can see the middle of the sledge, you've got a scar that's perhaps for a yoke, or a swivel type of mechanism, and it could have been a top gun, a gun in the top. So those are shown on early inventories as well. And this is actually the gun on the right-hand side from the Cattewater, which was the first shipwreck to be scheduled, protected under the Protection of Wrecks Act. And so this is still in Plymouth City Museum, the gun there. So very early. Now, for me, I'm obviously interested in being my life's work on the Mary Rose guns, but we had the difficulty. We've got this whole range of guns and didn't know what they were called. And there are all these funny names that occur in early manuscripts. So inventories are so important as part of the evidence to try and work out what you've got, and then and you get information within inventories about what sort of shot that particular named gun might have done. So by looking at the inventory sources and matching it with the archaeological resources, we've been able to, with the Mary Rose Ordnance, because the ship failed for 34 years. So you've got a huge period of change between 1509, when she began to be built, and 1545 when she sank, that a lot happened there. So you've got a complete transformation of ordnance. And so it's by mixing all these things that we've been able to basically put tangible images, and then if you've got size and you've got shape, and we can identify the actual guns within our assemblage, you can replicate them and you can test them and you learn a lot more. So the wonderful thing about the Mary Rose is we do have this inventory, which is like an archaeologist's tick list for what you might find on the seabed, which lists under descending order of size the guns of brass, of iron, gunpowder, shot of iron, shot of stone and lead. But by saying that port piece, for example, shot are all stone, and the biggest iron guns are port pieces, you can begin to say, oh, that's a port piece, or this is a Fowler, or this is a whatever. So the bronze guns are, hold on, I'll go back one. So the bronze guns are almost self-evident, because of the biggest ones obviously being the cannons, and the smaller ones being missing because they were high up on the ship. But it's again a bronze gun that found the site of the Mary Rose in 1836, and this is the one just below the image of John Deane working on the Royal George in the Solent, where he was called over in July 1836 to go and dive on an anomaly and net snagging. And in fact, the first diver was Henry Abinet, a local diver from Gosport, and he found a timber. John Deane then went in and found a bronze gun. And so there then happened to be, and it still happens now, a big controversy between, who is the person who first saw it and who had ownership and how do you divide it? And that went on for a number of years within the Mary Rose site. And John Deane had to fight quite hard in order to get exclusive rights to salvage the ship, the guns and the things from the ship, and then sell a lot of them. But he did have to share it with some of the Gosport fishermen. So these are some of the bronze guns he recovered from the Mary Rose site, all beautiful ones, and obviously identifying it as the Mary Rose because that was the only site a shipwreck in that area that had that was of the right period and the right time, and obviously they had dates in them. But interestingly, John Deane was also finding these crude pieces of ancient times that surely, if ever they'd been on the Mary Rose, they would be illegitimate ballast, as described by an antiquarian. And this may have been the saving grace, because these are actually part of the main deck complement. And thinking they were in the hold, all he did, sort of after finding a lot of these things, was dig 5 big holes and bury 13-inch mortars with gunpowder and ignite them, and blast holes in the seabed, some of which we found and wrongly attributed to anchor drag at various times, but which then led us, in fact, in some of these pits to find the broken carriages of the guns that he had lifted. So there's a lot of reverse engineering there between modern archaeology and past salvage. So we fast forward to the mid-60s, when Alex McKee is looking for, with South Sea Sub-Aqua Club, for ancient shipwrecks within the Solent area, in particular within the area around Spithead. And in 1970, found an iron gun after doing a whole load of different surveys, finding a map with a rough location for the Mary Rose and doing some sub-bottom profiler. And that's at the top image, the gun that found the Mary Rose. So we owe a lot to our guns, finding it the first time, the reason for trying to salvage it, the reason for quitting it. And here on the lower one are the guns in display, with one lifted by the Deans and given to the Royal Naval, eventually being in the Royal Naval Museum, our gun. And then in 1971, we found another big one. And this was our first port piece, the larger guns. So again, and we managed to lift them on their carriages. So the carriages, which again, because of, it depends on obviously the nature of the sinking, but those give huge information about how the gun was used, because the carriage is a mount for the gun. And if you've got that within the ship, then you're singing and dancing, especially if you've got any of the breaching and the rigging associated with. So these we identified as port pieces, and 12 listed, 8 recovered from them. So the guns of brass, again, this is to show the importance of the inventory, the cannons too, demi-cannons, culverins, demi-culverins, sakers, falcons, and again, how they might be within the shipwreck. So if you imagine this, these are the starboard ones, well, the port side ones would have been facing the other way. So the muzzles would have been available to have been pulled off, and they'd basically pulled off the carriages, leaving the carriages in situ. The other important thing about them is sometimes if they're in position, you've got evidence about how they would be used. Like here, you've got the coin. This is the cannon in the middle of the ship, and it's actually meaning that it can only be, it's being fired at point blank, the shortest range, absolutely sort of horizontal with the ship. So you're using the ship to fire the gun, if you like, in this position of the wreck. And then the other thing that's really important with shipwrecks and guns is the fact that you often get carriages, and quite a lot of bits of carriages. And with ours, each one is specifically tailored made to the place it was in. So this is all the wooden stuff that actually helps us to understand how the particular guns were used. Yeah. And here you see the archaeology of taking it apart. You've got the cap square, very crude. It's actually nailed on either side through the front of it rather than being hinged. And each one of these carriages is basically slightly different. So they are bespoke, and it just shows actually the early stages of it. And within 40 years, these change absolutely completely. And so when we see, I'm saying about being able to reunite places where the guns might have been by the carriages, this is the first gun raised by John Deane on the Mary Rose. And this is part of the front cheek of the carriage. And for that gun, and where it was found on the ship is actually here. And then, so we got the carriage cheeks facing forward, and then a meter down, the cascabel of the gun that was in situ, pairing it opposite. So a huge amount of information. So this is, again, why moving things without exactly, marking where they were, because they can give the indication of what's buried beneath. And so it's, removing guns from the seabed without due care is really the wrong thing to do. And then you see that there's a position within the whole starboard side gun representation of the Mary Rose, where you've got these mixture of the longer range cast bronze one, and then 2 wrought iron ones, which could have been worked together between the 2 of them, and then another bronze gun at the bow, which would have been again at longer range. So where they are within the ship is really important. And again, this is what shipwrecks can give us. And we can mark this change through the different names of guns. For the bronze guns, these you never know what they are. Obviously, we didn't have them, but they're big, large bronze guns. And then you get the smaller ones, and obviously by Falcon, you're getting small ones that are 2 or 3 inch bore. But it begins to change in 1540, and by 1546, these are names that we know. So importance of the guns of the Mary Rose is that they are over a really important period of time where you're getting quite medieval things that they're transforming then into guns that are used for the next 200 years. And again, this showing that you've got the shot that matches with the guns, and therefore you can say, okay, cannon, you've got 50 shot, but for port pieces, these are the guns of iron, and the only ones that use them are the slings, 4 slings. So there are a whole range of wrought iron guns that are using cast iron shot, and therefore you can immediately find those guns, distinguish the name of that gun if you find it associated with an iron shot, which is exactly what we were lucky enough to be able to do. And again, with the iron guns, you've got the same thing, these odd names, and being able to have hints. So cast iron, a hail shot piece, 20. These are cast guns, and they must be quite small because they're after the swivel guns, etc. So again, beginning to do names. So the other thing that's quite important is that often archaeological sites have lots of things concreted together with corroding iron, and the fantastic things that you can actually get if you radiograph and then you carefully work on these. So this is a big concretion that was found around the bow of the ship post the raising of the ship when we were doing seabed studies. But each one of those things, this is revealed by radiography, is an important object in its own right. When again you look at the radiography of even quite a small portion, that which could have been a scaffold pole by the size of it, and then you radiograph it and you expose it, and then that becomes half of a swivel gun or a base, which where they are on the inventory, and that's what they're called. The other guns, which are the important ones because they're the beginning of the mass production of cast iron guns on ships, are these hail shot pieces. Again, none of them are known. It's only because of the luck of the Mary Rose that we had these concretions, and this is a radiograph showing exactly what they are. And the shot says dice for hail shot. And here you go, 20 iron dice loaded in it with a champion in this rectangular bore, stupidest idea shape of a bore. And then made into bipartite mold like shot. Again, what a mistake for something which is a gun, because you can see between 1546, when they're listed for 20 and 50 per ship for the 58 ships within Henry's reign, by 1547, when he dies, they're all old and decrepit, languishing in armories within the various places within England. So obviously this mass sales thingy didn't last for very long, but it was a precursor to cast iron guns. Also, you get a lot of shot on shipwrecks, and here you begin to be able to do things like, well, if these are all cannon shot here, how many? And you've got 2 cannons listed. How many shot? And does that equate within the inventory as well? So you can begin to work out how many, how correct your assemblage is, and how much might be left on the seabed, or how much might have been taken before. All sorts of different types of shot too. You get this very unusual stuff which is lead shot with an iron dice, and the only reason for that is to make it spin. So we've got quite a lot of those, and those are for the swivel guns. And then all these different types that aren't necessarily listed within inventories, but some of them are, like shot of dice and lead, or shot or iron shot cost about with lead. So you're actually trying to work them out. And then this devastating anti-personnel stuff within. Now, I said that the cast iron on the hail shot piece were quite important because actually it was the beginning of being able to cast iron guns within England in large numbers. And so you jump forward only 30 years, and you've got guns like this from Alderney, and that allows you to do things like once we've identified the guns and the shot, and certainly within the position within the Solent, we've got an area that we can actually make a GIS map of the seabed, and with known places like Southsea Castle and Lumps Fort and the shot places on Gosport and the town, things like the Round Tower and the Square Tower which are there, and the position of the Mary Rose, you can actually be able to replay battle, and knowing how the guns work by trials and firing trials, you can actually see whether the French and the English are within distance that they could have impacted on one another. And with that, I'm going to hand over to the person who's been responsible for all of the trials that certainly we've undertaken with Mary Rose guns and others, to my colleague Nicholas Hall.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's an honour to follow you, and you're very much the inspiration for these trials, along with management at the Mary Rose and the Royal Armouries in rather different days in the late 1990s. And it's also a pleasure to speak from one of the great coastal artillery forts, Fort Cumberland. And so I'm going to start with a a gun, I call it based on the Cattewater gun because it's a smaller caliber, but it's a wrought iron breech loading gun, probably a serpentine. We still discuss the correct terms for these Tudor weapons, and like the smaller wrought iron guns, it's held down to the bed by, as it were, permanently by metal iron straps. So it was acquired. It was ordered from Colin Carpenter, who made several of these replicas, for firing blank for demonstrations at Fort Nelson and sometimes at Tower of London and elsewhere. And I was approached by Glenn Ford in 2010 to see if we could provide a gun to fire for trials to verify or not his theories on the site of the Battle of Bosworth and the lead shot that he'd found there. And so we thought, oh gosh, well, I suppose if it's good enough for blank, it's we can try it with projectile, with shot. And the picture shows it being prepared at Fort Nelson for one of these trials before going to Bosworth. And you note it looks as though it's on rather crude wheels there. I like to think the high wheels that are mentioned in one of the Tudor inventories. So a picture of it firing, and detail, probably more importantly, of the breech area with the chamber, the wrought iron chamber, not in place. So you can see, and I think there's a ball in the breech. The powder chamber is exactly what it says, powder chamber, but with wadding and a wooden plug. And for the trial, it went to the Defence Academy. They wanted to do pressure testing, which was great. We got the figures for breech pressures with different amounts of powder, and it was tested there in an indoor range. And as I say, in this case, the serpentine could certainly fire lead shot. And for a fairly small bore, about 60 millimeters, this is going to give you much more ballistic effect. There's an unfired shot on the left, and then with the tampion or the plug in the chamber fitted pretty tightly, you get an impression on the projectile after it's been fired or when it's fired, showing the force of the propellant, and at the bottom, one that's fired at a hard target on another trial. So the one of the things we learned was the importance of how you treat the gunpowder, how it's held in, and how it's going to drive the shot. And in this case, it's very efficient. You can't see the shot in that one, but it's a slow motion from the Bosworth trials. I won't summarize all the results. We'd be here all day, but it did show that firing lead shot or dice shot, there wasn't a great deal of difference when you use this composite shot with a iron or stone core. It was accurate and could range to easily 1,000 meters. We used it for a second trial. Some of you may be thinking he's talking about land trials, but that doesn't seem to me to be a problem because it's showing the abilities of a serpentine, which apply equally at sea, or in a comparable way. So here we're set up for firing at Fort Nelson. That horrible bit of plywood in the next slide is because I was worried about the difficulty of hitting a deer for a battlefield trauma study from Bournemouth University, Lisbeth Nassager, Belgian student. And for economy, because we didn't have the facilities at Fort Nelson to cast lead, the lead shot for the previous trial were cast at Shrivenham. I decided to use iron, and so I used iron shot and got one stuck. So we had to have a rapid rethink and find, because we have to use stock balls from a supplier. We found the next size down was okay, but it was hopelessly inaccurate. So I had real difficulty in hitting the target. But in the end, we succeeded, as the poor old dear. I've got more gruesome pictures than that, but that'll do for now. And then they got Poole Hospital to do some scans, and so on the right is the skeleton. But it could indicate that you might use even solid shot as an anti-personnel weapon. We'll move rapidly on to the port piece replica, Mayro's port piece, wrought iron. Here on its elm bed, and again missing the breech, and that's because we actually had to make the bed and all the carriage parts fit the barrel before the breech was ready. It was a rush job, and that's one of the problems with television work, to which we're greatly indebted, but you work to their schedule. The deer trial was to our schedule. It was nothing to do with television. So the port piece, we used to think in the office, I wonder how they made those wrought iron guns. So fortunately, with the expert blacksmith Chris Topp, it was worked out. The key bit, well, a particular bit is getting out the core around which the barrel was built, and that's so the thing that looks like a chimney is the wooden core being burnt out. We had to look very carefully at breech chambers, and because these provide not only the powder chamber, but like the serpentine, it's the seal as well. So that metal taper fitted into the barrel is what seals the gases in. And fortunately, it was possible to get an original one sectioned in the dockyard at Portsmouth, and it showed the construction, of which we were quite unaware of, two layers of plate and then the hoops on top. And it's barely visible to see the welds on the breech plug, and that you can bear in mind, if you will. Yes. That is a bit of a disaster. There were several disasters. Okay, with this port piece trial, it was with Yorkshire Television. That wasn't a disaster in itself, of course. It was very good, but it caused disruption to our firing schedule. And I have to admit that I was possibly a little bit over-ambitious with the powder charge. But the very fuzzy picture is because it's a still from a fragment of video. A disaster for BAE Systems was that they unplugged the high-speed camera before it had saved. So there's very little we have. So there aren't many pictures of the serpentine in this particular presentation. What happened is the breech plug, which you can see coming up there, it obviously came out of its mounting, and that was because the plug at the back of the chamber had ruptured. So one of the key things was that the strength of the wrought iron, the barrel and the chamber walls themselves were quite adequate for my possible overcharging. And it was the difficulty of welding in the plug, which is testament to Tudor blacksmithing. But Chris Topp was able to fit a new plug and to weld it successfully. And so further trials were done with stone shot and with lanthorn shot, which is a form of grape shot. and appeared to be highly effective, but I haven't got pictures of that, and we need to press on. So the last of the Mary Rose trials we did was of a culverin. Alex's choice of support piece and culverin were to give two contrasting examples of main armament on the Mary Rose and try and work out what their tactical purposes might have been. So here we are at the ranges at Shoebury Ness, right at the north end, with a culverin, which you can only just see near the van. And just go on. One of the features of the late 16th, early 17th centuries is you do get the appearance of a lot of books, and I use Hildred a lot, 1646, but he was in his 80s when he wrote it, so his training was way back into the 16th century, so I think I'm allowed to use Hildred, and that's just I'm not expecting you to read it, but it's an example of his detailed work on the first range tables from practical experiment. He was a true gunner, and Alex aiming the culverin. You can see the bed below, and in that case I'm rushing on, but they're very ingenious, these early four-truck carriages, rather than bed, I should say. But it is built on a wooden bed. And it shows that clearly to us anyway, these must have been kind of experimental. And there's a huge load on the bed itself, just about where the cursor is. And we did actually find that cracked in service. And of course, they were superseded within a very few years. I'm going to cut off Guy there. That was Guy Wilson, former master of the armories. So I was going to say about carriages that this kind of turning point and the in development, and then you get very soon after, I mean certainly by 1580, more or less the four-truck carriage, the simplified form that went on till middle of the 19th century. You've seen in the video really, but the top one, another still, shows the ball travelling. Below is the Mary Rose target from the inside of the ship, showing what a 6 kilo iron ball will do when it's travelling at several hundred meters per second. And I'm afraid that one comes from a much more recent trial with only a 12-pounder, much smaller gun, based on a gun from a wreck, going through 12 inches of oak. And it doesn't look like much at the front, but like the Mary Rose target, it's a mess at the back. And I could say a great deal more about the trials, but I'm not going to. But I just pick up on the Alderney wreck gun. I was asked to get to cast a replica of that gun for television program, and that's us firing it at a range in the West Country. Thank you. Well, I can go on. I can go on.
Was that your last? Are you done?
But that's the last slide, and I haven't checked the time, but I could summarize. No, good. I'm trying.
Let's see if there are any questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nick, and to Alex. If people do have any questions, then do come and let us know in the chat, ideally, or in the Q&A. If not, then I might ask one or two. Okay, I've got a question very quickly to Nick in terms of this importance of the power of a particular gun, and how would you define that power?
All right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, obviously we got lots of information. So the the importance of the power is really what the effect you want on the target is, and at how far. And the actual, the equation, of course, is the mass times the velocity of the projectile squared, roughly speaking. So we've got that information for the first time with, for example, the culverin firing at over 500 meters per second, a 6 kilo ball. So you're getting absolutely loads of kilojoules out of it. And we know it'll go straight through a target. So it's really powerful. And just like the Hildred tables give, it'll do it at muzzle velocity is the 500, but it's still going really fast at say 500 meters or something. So you've got loads of power, but what's it going to do? So in sticking to the culverin, this ball will easily go through the ship. It'll destroy anything in the way,
out the other side,
and it'll go out the side, still going really fast. So it's certainly going to cause a lot of damage. But do you need that amount of damage?
Yeah.
And so it's a very good piece for the Mary Rose, because you might want to take on a galley, for example. But if you hit the bow of a galley, you drip through the whole thing. But you've got it really difficult to load, and so quite slow to fire. So my deduction is that apart from the difficulty of loading the culverin on board, you don't need it as powerful.
Yeah.
And I won't
overkill.
Yeah. So in the next century, the guns tended to be iron, but that's for a reason of economy. But you can make them shorter, and you don't need that velocity. And you get the Drakes, for example, which are sort of detuned in my view.
Makes them lighter as well, presumably.
Yeah, which is a great advantage. You can load them inboard. You can fire more often, and then you get the development for fleet tactics.
Yeah, as Alex says, you can get more of them on board.
Way more of them.
Way more. Okay, well, we have overrun slightly by a couple of minutes.